Mark Rogers, TV, talking some Ohio State football with Brandon Zimmerman from Buckeye Battle Cry. And of course, the Buckeyes have a big matchup with Michigan State. Brandon, we appreciate the time. This is always a good discussion. We expected this one to be a little bit bigger than it is, but Sparty took it down hard for 7 straight weeks before rallying against Rutgers like everyone else does, 49-0. But man, this has been quite the rivalry. So, taking it from my son's perspective, he actually considers Michigan State a bigger rivalry because he's been watching college football for 5 or 6 years and thinks Michigan, well, he'll finally get to see a real Ohio State-Michigan game probably this year. But when you look at the Michigan State game, it's been something else since Urban Meyer arrived on campus in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where your son is coming from with that because here in the recent years, Michigan just hasn't been on the same level. They've gone through the Brady Hoke era and the Rich Rod, and it just hasn't been the level of competition that Ohio State and Michigan normally is. So it has been Michigan State that has always played the Buckeyes so tough. D'Antonio and his staff is the only team that has beaten an Urban Meyer coached Buckeye team more than once. They're sitting at 2-2. So regardless of what has happened prior to this game, I mean, Michigan State has been god-awful at times. They've got a good team. They have recruited talent, and they were just in the playoffs last year. They've battled a bunch of injuries this year. I know I was reading off of their game notes that they have not started the same starting lineup on offense or defense at any point this year because of injuries or, just various problems. So I think last week was a good thing for them. And that's what worries me as a Buckeye fan is that Michigan State has the talent there. When teams start to go into a spiral like they were, where they lost 7 straight games, they lost games to Illinois and, just teams like that they should never lose to. All it takes is one good game for them to bounce out of that. And, beating Rutgers, even though Rutgers is god-awful, beating them 49-0, could be that thing that sparks, that internal fire and gets them going straight again. So regardless of what has happened so far this year, I think going into this game, Buckeye fans should not be as confident as you might think facing I think they're 3-7 team. And, they should, be ready for a closer game than one might imagine.
Yeah, it's been a Michigan State team that definitely misses Connor Cook. They've played 2 quarterbacks and actually a third quarterback at times. LJ Scott has been the guy that has been counted upon to run the football and be the marquee running back, and a kid that just got past Ohio State in regards to the recruiting battle. And he definitely, in emerging last season en route to the college football playoff, is the real deal. And despite the offensive issues, has certainly emerged and continued his career path. The defense giving up more big plays than we've ever seen. But in looking at the situation since Urban Meyer arrived, Brandon, in 2012, this has basically been the game that has decided the season for better or worse. So if you go back to 2012, as you remember well, Urban Meyer was later talking about, in the aftermath of the 2012 season, kind of talking about this was a 7-5 team. Now, of course, he didn't say that publicly at the time, but thinking this team's not real good. Then they went to East Lansing and pulled off a 17-16 win. And it wasn't a great Michigan State team, but a quality team, a very tough team on the road. The Buckeyes pull that out. They march on to an undefeated season. The next year, they're that close to a national championship game, and Michigan State pulls it out from under them. 2014, the Buckeyes down after the loss to Virginia Tech, got it going against some marginal opponents, then really tested as a road underdog. Of course, Urban Meyer's undefeated as a underdog at Ohio State, and they go to East Lansing, and that really propelled them again to the Big Ten championship and the national title. And then last year, when most of us would still consider a year later that to be the best team possibly in the country and certainly in the Big Ten, they just kind of sleepwalked through a game in Columbus on a rainy day and lost on a last-second field goal to Michigan State 17-14. So it's been an intriguing series.
Yeah, fans are still crying about feed Zeke the ball. It was just crazy how they did not give him the ball too much at all last year. And that and the other loss, it was the same thing with Carlos Hyde. It's 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, feed, hide the ball. So, I think it's just like we talked about earlier. Buckeye fans have this growing amount of hate / respect for the Spartans. And it's just Michigan State's played the Buckeyes so well. And hopefully this year with Ohio State rolling the way they are right now, they can keep it going. They can get Curtis Samuel incorporated. Mike Weber had kind of a half off last week that he could rest his shoulders. So hopefully Mike Weber can keep going. And with JT Barrett at quarterback, he's the steady presence. So hopefully, the Buckeyes do not have their offensive struggles that they've had at times against Michigan State. And hopefully the weather does not play too big of a role in it this year. It looks like it's supposed to be windy and rainy, just like it was last year. And we saw how that turned out. The Ohio State playbook kind of closes down as soon as the wind and rain starts up. So hopefully it holds off.
So in addressing the offensive swoon, most importantly is blocking up front, getting wide receivers open, winning football games. But in regards to recognition across the country, JT Barrett, of course, got off to the hot start, highlighted by the effort at Oklahoma with Noah Brown catching 4 touchdown passes. Then came the offensive swoon. But in recent weeks, the explosion has come back. He's actually had time to throw. The offensive line has been shored up in recent weeks. He's working on a 23 touchdown, 4 interception season, running the football effectively as he typically does with 8 rushing touchdowns. Curtis Samuel, we talked about it before we came on, would need a really strong rushing finish to his season, but if they get to a Big Ten championship or a national playoff situation, could extend his season, get to 1,000 yards rushing and receiving. But these are 2 guys that, despite playing at the Ohio State and putting up big numbers for a team that's in the hunt for a national championship, not getting a whole lot of national recognition for a possible Heisman push.
Yeah, it's almost like these 2 guys kind of cancel each other out. Because I know ESPN came out with their list of Heisman candidates today, and it had 12 people on it, and not one Buckeye was listed there. When you think of JT Barrett, he's at almost 3,000 total yards. He's at 31 touchdowns total combined, only 4 interceptions. You have Curtis Samuel, who is, just over 1,400 yards of total offense, 13 touchdowns. He's averaging 10 yards per touch. You would think these type of numbers on the number 2 ranked team would get you into the top, 12 at least of the Heisman rankings. I don't get too caught up in the Heisman rankings. The debate this year. I think Lamar Jackson's pretty much got this thing wrapped up, but it's just kind of funny that you think these guys don't even make it into the top 12 when you got guys like Jabril Peppers who, really stats don't match up anything for him to be in the top 12 of the Heisman race. It's just, Curtis Samuel and JT Barrett are kind of canceling each other out, and I honestly don't think they care that much as long as the team keeps rolling and putting up 62 points a game like they have the last couple of weeks. I think both of those guys would be okay with not getting any national recognition.
All right, so numbers 2, 3, and 4 go down on upset Saturday. That's Michigan, it's Clemson, it's Washington. Ohio State jumps from 5 to 2, and it was pretty logical, the order of the finish for the college football playoff rankings this past Tuesday, with Alabama leading the way. But a lot of interesting scenarios in mind, and if you follow college football, you've probably heard this one play out. If the Buckeyes win out and Penn State does as well, then you've got a 2-way tie and Penn State wins the tiebreaker. They move on to the Big Ten championship game. If Michigan wins out, obviously they are the Big Ten Eastern Division representative. So let's talk a messy situation here, Brandon. The first scenario has Ohio State winning out, finishing 11-1. We would think, having just defeated the 3rd-ranked team in the country, that they would keep their number 2 position going into the Big Ten championship weekend. But Penn State goes, and let's say they defeat a top 10 Wisconsin team in the Big Ten championship game. That's an interesting call for the committee.
Yeah, there are a lot of hot takes going on out there about, if the Buckeyes win out, they're going to make it, or there's some people that, feel like if the Buckeyes win out, they will not make it, based on them not going to a conference championship game. I I think at this point, no one really knows. If you ask anyone, I think they will say that they feel like Ohio State is one of the top 4 teams in the nation. The question is, does the committee feel that way? We've had 2 years of this college football playoffs. Both years, the committee has kind of put some sort of emphasis on the conference championships, which may hurt the Buckeyes. I know a member of the committee came out today and said that if, one of the teams that they feel like is the top 4 is not a conference championship, champion, they would still put them in. But based off last year, you look at last year with the Buckeyes, they were the defending champs. They returned most of their players from the championship team. They lost 1 game early against Michigan State on a last-second field goal. Many people thought they were a top 4 team. After that Michigan win, Ohio State was ranked number 6. You take a team like Stanford, who was ranked number 7. Stanford went on to play in a conference championship. Mind that, Stanford had 2 losses. They had lost to Northwestern. They had lost to Notre Dame. They win the Pac-12 championship, and they jump the Buckeyes in the standings. So, even though it didn't jump them into the playoffs, it still was them jumping the Buckeyes in the college football playoff standings. Even though people thought the Buckeyes were one of the top 4 teams, they only had 1 loss, and Stanford had 2 losses. But that Pac-12 championship is what made them jump. So, going into that Pac-12 championship week, Stanford was ranked behind the Buckeyes. That Pac-12 championship win had them jump the Buckeyes. So, we don't know if that'll happen this year. You and I spoke beforehand too, in 2014, how TCU was ranked number 3. Buckeyes win a Big Ten championship. They jump TCU. So we just don't know what is going to happen this year. I just feel like no one can really be confident in what the committee is going to do. We just got to watch these final 2 weeks and see what all plays out. If it was anything like last weekend, it's going to be a fun 2 weeks for all of us.
So, Brandon, for me, if Penn State wins the Big Ten championship, they're 11-2. Ohio State's 11-1. That's the only criteria the Buckeyes have over the Nittany Lions is the better overall record. But Penn State won the head-to-head. They are the Big Ten champions. I don't think it's much of a discussion. I think Penn State gets the nod. It's just a matter of what happens elsewhere in the country that could possibly get the Buckeyes a second bid for the Big Ten. On the other hand, if Wisconsin wins the Big Ten championship and the Buckeyes have the head-to-head and the better overall record, I would give the nod to Ohio State over Wisconsin, again, just based on the head-to-head, despite Wisconsin winning the conference championship. And I can't imagine that Oklahoma, having lost to Ohio State head-to-head at home by 3 touchdowns and having 2 losses, could beat out the Buckeyes. The committee, to a certain extent, has done everything logically. I can't fault the way they have teams placed. I've gone through it with a pretty fine-tooth comb, and I have very few. I have 1 or 2 teams position one spot differently, but they have positioned themselves to make a very difficult call because Ohio State could be number 2, having just upped its resume even more by defeating number 3. And how do you drop them 3 spots to number 5 after championship weekend? It could get really messy, and it could be really fun for debate.
Yes, it could. And you were talking about the Sooners. It looks like the Sooners are going to win the Big 12. What if USC comes out and wins the Pac-12, or, a team like that has 3 losses? That takes out 2 conference champs right there that you can't see jumping the Buckeyes at all. A 3-loss USC team, as good as they are playing right now, is not going to jump the Buckeyes. You cannot justify the Sooners jumping the Buckeyes too, when the Sooners, got manhandled by the Buckeyes. So, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. It's college football. That's why we all love it so much.
Yeah, Ohio State's basically in a very similar situation as last year when they lost the wrong game. They should have lost to Rutgers or somebody, but they lost to Michigan State, lost the head-to-head. And on championship weekend, they were sitting there while most people considered them one of the 4 best teams in the country, and they were sitting there rooting for chaos to ensue to vault them into the top 4. They're in better position this year from a ranking standpoint, but in regards to conference championships being played out, again, they will have to break the mold to make the college football playoff, most likely, unless something tragic happens to Penn State in the next 2 weeks and maybe Sparty pulls off an upset in week whatever it is, 14.
Yeah,
all right, maybe. Brandon Zimmerman from the Buckeye Battle Cry. We join you each and every Wednesday night. We're going to make this a regular thing with Brandon. We appreciate the time, Brandon.
All right, thank you very much, Mark.